The first thing I loved about her was that she never got tired of me, and that should have been my first serious reason for suspicion. No, I'm not one of those bitter cynics who believe that long-distance love is just a substitute, and feelings don't count unless they're backed by a mountain of paperwork and shared grocery shopping trips. I believe in the chemistry of words. But Nora was something beyond. She was always present in my life in exactly the proportion my ego required. If I wrote to her at 2 a.m, she was awake. If I sent her an unfunny meme, she turned it into the joke of the century. If I had an existential crisis over work, she somehow magically knew exactly what I needed right then. Sincere sympathy, a cold shower of irony, or the digital equivalent of grabbing me by the scruff of the neck and telling me to stop being a rag. It didn't resemble ordinary human interaction. It was custom-made work, a jeweler's cut of meanings. And I, like the last idiot, thought I'd simply hit the jackpot. We met in the most ridiculous way possible, under a post about terrible roommates. I left a comment about how living with men was voluntary consent to emotional ignorance from dirty frying pans and mismatched socks. She replied, Nora_99, "That sounds like you're the roommate in question." I didn't let it slide. That sounds like slander from someone who's never seen how perfectly I arrange dishes in the drying rack by height and mood. She cut in. Men always say that a second before presenting the world with mold in the sink that already has a name and the right to vote. And that was it. That was the start. No cinematic first lines. No, your eyes are like stars. Just two strangers publicly sniping at each other with such perfect rhythm that there was immediately something dangerous about it. We moved to private messages that same night. This should have alarmed me too. Not the speed of moving to DMs, but the ease with which everything developed. Talking to Nora wasn't like building a new acquaintance. It was like returning to an old, interrupted conversation. As if she already knew my tempo, my pressure points, and the exact dose of teasing that would keep me hanging in the chat until 4 a.m, even though I had to be up at 7. She was impossible. And by impossible, I mean impeccably constructed. She was smart, but not boring. She was bold, but never crossed the line into toxicity. She was tender, but without being clingy. Long-distance relationships have their own specific weather. There's no physical awkwardness, no pauses while you eat salad and don't know what to talk about. There are only words, timing, and that unhealthy closeness where at 3 a.m. you can write things you'd never dare say out loud in daylight. Nora was the queen of that weather. On some nights, she was so soft that my fists literally unclenched. She'd ask if I'd eaten, scold me when I lied about sleeping, and send voice messages where irony and caring somehow agreed to cooperate. On other nights, she was merciless. If I whined about work, she'd write, "You're phrasing your suffering like you're auditioning for the lead role in a drama for intellectuals. Get it together." If I sent her a photo, she'd comment, "You're standing like someone who regularly loses arguments with his own furniture. Fix your posture." I started falling into this abyss when I realized that Nora was always with me now. I checked my phone during lectures. I thought about how she'd respond to this or that news before I'd even finished reading it. I'd see something stupid on the street, and my first instinct was to reach for my camera to send it to her. That's a sure sign that someone has started colonizing your head. You stop experiencing events alone, even if physically you're by yourself. I knew her habits, or thought I did. 1. She typed faster when she was excited. 2. She put periods at the end of sentences when she was genuinely upset. 3. She loved night trains, old libraries, and claimed to hate romance novels, though she criticized them in suspicious detail. When my friend Daller, tired of listening to my raptures, asked, "Listen, what's wrong with her anyway? People aren't perfect," I answered with all the seriousness of a lovesick fool. "She's just a very multifaceted person. It's like several different moods live inside her at once." Daller laughed right into his glass. Dude, no girl is that naturally diverse. That sounds like there's a whole committee behind that account. I should have listened then, but instead I replied, "You're just jealous because no one texts you good night without a court order." "I'm serious," he added. "Either she's the most complex woman on the planet, or you've stumbled into some kind of group project." At the time, I chalked it up to his usual friendly mischief. Now, looking back, I realize he was standing on the threshold of the truth, like a drunken prophet. Because Nora really did feel like several people, and that was the main secret of her appeal. She could never bore me. She was perfect. And I was too in love to understand. Perfection of that level is usually created by a team, not by accident. The first warning sign was coffee. It sounds ridiculous, I know, petty, almost childish. But when you talk to someone every day for 4 months, you involuntarily start compiling a dossier on them. Not the kind intelligence agencies keep, but the kind that forms in your heart. An emotional Excel sheet where every line is a habit, a taste, or a casual confession. Nora drank black coffee. It was the foundation of her image. Not just a preference, but a whole ideology. She once wrote to me, "Milk and coffee is for people who want dessert, but are afraid of responsibility toward life." I saved that message because it was a specimen of that same elegant aggression she practiced better than anyone. And then, a couple of weeks later, she sent me a photo. A huge cup of caramel frappuccino, a mountain of whipped cream, and rainbow sprinkles. The caption read, "This is medicine. I won't survive today without it." I stared at the screen. My fingers froze over the keyboard. Me. Wait, I thought you despised coffee that looks like it had a difficult childhood and too many toys. The answer came instantly. Nora_99. What? No, I love this garbage. It's literally happiness in plastic. What are you talking about? At that moment, I should have hit pause. But love does terrible things to a man's pattern recognition. It takes solid evidence, paints it with lip gloss, and calls it mystery. I just thought, sweet. Today she's in the mood to contradict herself. Girls will be girls. Coffee wasn't the only oddity. Her humor had started to drift. Not so much that it looked like an obvious fake, but enough to cause mild dissonance when you lined up the weeks side by side. On Monday, she was the embodiment of cool wit and polished phrasing. She could say, "You formulate your self-pity like a man trying to get government funding for it." That was my Nora, sharp as a scalpel. And 3 days later, the same Nora wrote, "LMAO, you're such a loser, I'm literally dying at this video." Same account, same avatar, but a completely different linguistic ecosystem. As if the same musical instrument suddenly switched from a classical piano to a synth with cheap effects. This was especially noticeable at night. Nighttime Nora was doubly unstable. Some evenings, she was soft, incredibly, unfathomably tender, as if she could feel my ragged breathing through kilometers of fiber optic cable and wanted to fix my world without turning kindness into a performance. She might write, "I wish I were there. I'd make you go to sleep and then kiss your forehead as a reward." And a week later, at the same hour, in a similar conversation, she might say, "Go to sleep. You become emotionally useless after midnight. Don't piss me off." I even started joking to Dallaire that I was dating a girl with seasonal firmware. "That's not firmware, dude," he grumbled when we were at a bar. "That's a shared login. No living person can switch personality settings that cleanly unless there's a subscription fee or an identity disorder behind it." I told him to shove it. But deep down, I'd already started noticing another detail. Her memory was selective. Strangely selective. She could forget that I hate voice messages in the morning, even though we joked about it a dozen times, and suggest a call at 8 a.m. as if nothing had happened. but she remembered the exact phrasing of a random comment I'd made a month and a half ago about how I'd like to die in a stationery store because leather-bound notebooks look smarter than I do. How can you forget my sleep schedule, but remember my existential crisis in the notebook aisle? That's not a human memory pattern. That's delegation of authority. The worst part was the flirting, because it came in 3 different streams. Version 1 of Nora flirted lazily and warmly. She played with you like a cat with a ball of yarn, claws sheathed. If I were there, I'd steal your attention and your favorite t-shirt. Version 2 flirted like she wanted to win. Her words were full of excitement and challenge. You're taking too much credit for a guy I could reduce to stammering with one message. And the third? The most dangerous. It crept under your skin at 1 a.m. and made you feel like your entire being had become public property. You know, I think I'd recognize your tired gaze in any crowd, even if you were hiding behind a mask. The scariest part was that all 3 versions felt genuine to me. I didn't see a crack. I saw facets. I convinced myself that I'd been lucky enough to meet a woman of incredible range, alive, real, someone who couldn't be squeezed into a single tone. The evidence I couldn't ignore appeared on a Wednesday. I was having a truly shitty day, a pointless meeting, a missed lunch, and a mild nervous breakdown by 5 p.m. I wrote to Nora, "Today's just garbage." She answered instantly, "Tell me everything. I'm armed with tea and emotionally available." I poured it all out, paragraphs of text, sincerity that shouldn't be trusted to cloud storage without legal oversight. Her response was perfect. She was sympathetic where needed, ironic where appropriate, and just severe enough to keep me from sliding into self-pity. I read it twice and thought, that's it. I'm done for. She's definitely the one. And an hour later, I made a tiny reference to the same situation. She replied, Nora_99. Wait, what happened with your boss? You didn't tell me. I stared at the screen. Me. You literally calmed me down about that exact thing half an hour ago. She paused for a minute. Nora_99. Oh God, sorry. I was replying on the go, on the tram. My head is completely fogged up. My brain is just wallpaper today. Another perfect answer. Plausible. Smoothing over the edges. Of course, I accepted it. But a splinter remained inside me. Because you can't write a perfect psychological analysis of a situation and then forget its essence 30 minutes later, unless you have amnesia or unless you switched personnel. Nora's personality had too many settings, too many rhythms. And for the first time, instead of the thought, she's so interesting, another, far more frightening one flickered through my mind. What if I'm not talking to the same girl? But that thought was too insane to believe, and I, like a true volunteer in captivity of my own feelings, decided to just become more attentive, which, as it turned out later, was exactly my path to disaster. On the day I finally arranged to meet Nora, I wore the wrong shirt. In the end, that turned out to be the least of my problems, but for the record, I want to state this fact. I was wearing the shirt of a man who had spent too long wondering whether dark blue made him look more emotionally stable than black. Spoiler, it doesn't. Not that it mattered, because by the time I got to the station, my body had turned into a single exposed live wire, and my shirt could have been made of diplomatic immunity. It wouldn't have helped. This was that moment. After 4 months of messages, late-night calls, photos, voice notes, inside jokes, and a humiliating degree of attachment, I was finally going to see her in real life. Nora herself suggested meeting at the central station. Her argument sounded like this. It's crowded enough to stop you from doing anything crazy in the first 30 seconds. I replied, that sounds like a challenge. She parried, that sounds like a reason we need witnesses. At the time, I thought it was just her usual style. In retrospect, it was a heartfelt confession in cheap packaging. I arrived early, of course. Hope does strange things to your sense of time. It turns punctuality into superstition. I stood by the giant electronic departure board with coffee I didn't need, checking my phone every 30 seconds. As if the mere fact of a message not arriving fast enough could change the future I was about to walk into. And then the screen lit up. Nora_99. We're here. I frowned. We. Not I'm here. Not come outside. Not even some typical joke about her outfit needing group approval. Just a dry and frightening we. I stared at the word. And then, since my body decided to keep functioning despite common sense, I looked up. 3 girls were walking straight toward me. At first, my brain, true to form, tried to solve the wrong problem. Maybe she brought friends? Maybe they're just passing by. Maybe, and this was the stupidest thought, all 3 came to deliver a verdict on whether I'm safe enough for one of them to stake a claim on? But they stopped right in front of me, and each looked at me as if she knew me personally. Not just casually, but deeply, intimately, on a 3 a.m. level. It's one of the most chilling experiences a man can have in a public place, meeting 3 strangers with the expressions of people who have already seen you emotionally naked. 1. The tall girl on the left with dark hair and that cold, precise face I'd always pictured for Nora when she wrote something ruthless and elegant. 2. The girl in the center looked the most nervous. She was gripping her bag strap, and her face held a softness I would have recognized out of 1,000. This was how Nora wrote to me when she asked if I'd eaten and told me to go to sleep. 3. The one on the right looked like she was about to either start flirting or set the departure board on fire, just to see it burn. I looked at them. They looked at me. And then the nervous girl said very quietly, "Hi." It was terrible, because the voice matched. Not all of Nora's voice notes, but a specific version of them. That very one, the night one, warm, medicinal. I shifted my gaze to the others, then back. And I said the most eloquent thing I was capable of. "What?" The girl on the right winced. The tall one closed her eyes for a second. The nervous one swallowed. And the tall one, the one who had clearly appointed herself the delegation's spokesperson, said, "We need to explain something." There are moments in life when your brain tries to reject reality simply on the grounds of its absurdity. This was one of them. I looked at them and thought, no. No, because that sentence itself is idiotic. No, because words don't have the right to cause this much damage with one line. No, because I've been falling in love with a girl for 4 months, not with whatever this is. Nora isn't one person, the tall one added. I laughed, short, harsh, and in complete disbelief. That's not Russian. That's not a real sentence. The girl on the right, with the sharp face and dangerous energy, also let out a half laugh. Not from amusement. Panic just does strange things to witnesses. "Yeah," she said. "That's the whole problem." I took a step back, instinctively, as if distance could help the world organize itself into something less offensive. "No." "Explain properly." The tall one, I think her name was Allison, though I didn't know it yet, nodded, matter-of-factly, terrifyingly. "We all use the account." She glanced briefly at her friends. "At first it was meant as a joke, and then it stopped being one." The words reached me in fragments. All. Used. The account. Joke. Stopped. I looked at the nervous one. She immediately looked away. Looked at the bold one. She held my gaze as if she expected me to hate her and had already decided to survive it with style. Looked at the tall one. The one built to stand at the epicenter of a disaster without blinking. "You're joking," I said. The nervous one whispered, "No, of course not. If they were joking, they would have chosen a quieter place, not a station where I was about to start behaving like a wounded animal." I looked around. People walked past. Trains arrived. Ordinary lives continued. And I stood under the departure board, learning that my internet girlfriend was, essentially, a startup. "We should sit down," Allison said. "You think?" I snapped. "Fair," mumbled Catherine, the one on the right. We ended up in the station cafe, because the universe clearly wanted every major emotional trauma of mine to involve a table. I sat on one side, the three of them sat on the other. It should have looked funny, but it didn't. It looked like I was about to be given the worst group presentation in human history. For a while, everyone was silent. And then I asked the question that finally destroyed the remnants of my defenses. "So, which of you is Nora?" The nervous one opened her mouth. The bold one did too. But the tall one, Allison, just looked at me tiredly and said, "That's the whole problem. We all are Nora." And at that moment, all the contradictions, all the shifts in tone, all the perfectly tailored words that I'd taken for magic clicked into place with a snap. And I almost regretted it, because the truth was far stupider and more painful than I could have imagined. There was no perfect girl. There were 3 real women who took turns being exactly who I needed. And that realization hit me with a wave of nausea that no station snack could rival. The worst part wasn't the confession itself, but that their explanation sounded logical. Not from a moral or common sense standpoint, but purely technically. It's a terrible feeling, realizing that your 4-month love of my life was a well-oiled production process. Allison spoke first. She had the aura of someone who writes apology letters that no one deserves, but that all courts in the world would accept. Her name was Allison, the tall and cold one. The nervous girl turned out to be Samantha. Soft voice, nighttime care, please eat at 3 a.m. The bold one, Catherine. I could have guessed that myself. Sharpness, audacity, and those very phrases after which I paced the room, feeling like I'd been set on fire by a semicolon. Allison folded her hands around a cardboard coffee cup. It all started when Catherine created the account as a joke. "That's too simplified," Catherine interjected. "It's the version that matters first," Allison snapped, with the look of someone who'd been practicing suppression of others' will long before I entered her life. Samantha just stared at the table, as if it had personally offended her. I said nothing, mostly because I didn't trust my vocal cords, afraid that instead of words, a wounded accountant's growl would escape. "Catherine chatted with people out of boredom," Allison continued. "She came across your comment. At first, you were just another guy. Then she got tired of replying all the time." "That's not how it," Catherine began, but Allison didn't even turn. "Then Samantha got involved because she thought you were cute. And then I butted in because these two were behaving unprofessionally." This wasn't comfort. It was a report on social machination. I looked at Catherine. "So at first I was just a bit? A prank?" Catherine held my gaze. "At the very beginning, yes. The very beginning. If she'd stayed a smug bitch, I would have hated her easily and beautifully. But a shadow of regret surfaced in her voice. A tiny one, but enough to complicate my rage. And I hate complications in the early stages of betrayal." "When did it stop being a game?" No one answered immediately. That was a bad sign. Silence on such questions means the answer doesn't fit within the bounds of decency. Finally, Samantha spoke, first in a whisper. "When you got sick, in February, remember?" I remembered. I'd crashed with a 40-degree fever for 3 days. "You wrote strangely, short phrases, seemed lost," Samantha fidgeted with the edge of her scarf. And we got scared. Really scared. We took shifts, Catherine added. I froze. Excuse me, what? You weren't responding consistently. Allison looked at me with that insufferable directness of hers. So one of us was always online. We checked the chat every 15 minutes to make sure you weren't getting worse. And then it became a habit, part of life. There it was. An answer worse than any prank. Worse than any fraud. I leaned back in my chair and looked at them. The three horsemen of my personal apocalypse. Two incompatible realities stood before my eyes. First, they'd lied to me. For months. Knowingly. Second, they, damn it, had genuinely cared whether I'd eaten, slept, and survived the flu. It was an emotional trap. If they'd just been mean, it would have been easier. But they were caring deceivers. You could have stopped at any time, I said. Samantha hunched her shoulders. We know. No, you really could have. I raised my voice to a loud whisper. You had months. Any one of you could have written the truth. Catherine's jaw tensed. You think we didn't know that? Every week we planned to do it, and every week it got harder. This wasn't a defense. It was a statement of fact. I hated that this admission mattered to me. Context doesn't justify betrayal, but it does stop you from turning people into flat cartoon villains. You all knew I thought I was talking to one person? I hated myself for asking this question. It's humiliating to demand confirmation of the scale of your own humiliation. Yes, Allison answered. I'm sorry, Samantha whispered. Catherine said nothing, which was more eloquent than anything. I looked at the cafe window, at the hurried people, at the ordinary world. And then I asked the most painful question. Was any of it real? On your part? Silence. That pause hurt more than the news of the deception itself. Finally, Catherine looked up. Too real. That was the whole nightmare. It was a phrase I wasn't ready for. Because if she'd said no, I could have just cursed them out and left. If she'd said maybe, I'd have chalked it up to an attempt to smooth things over. But too real. That phrase held a story. Those very nights, those very shifts, and that degree of attachment that people don't admit to unless it's already destroyed them. The joke stopped being funny a long time ago, Allison added, staring into her empty cup. And Samantha, finally raising her tear-filled eyes to me, finished. We just didn't know how to fix it without losing you forever. And at that moment, anger ceased to be my only fuel. Because I saw the structure of this madness. A prank turned into a habit into a lie, and a lie into a relationship that none of them knew how to end. It turned out that Nora wasn't just a joke. She was a tragedy for three. And one deceived guy in a blue shirt who just realized the truth is 4 times worse than the lie. For the first 2 days after the station meeting, I honestly tried to hate them. It would have been logical. It would have been right according to any psychology textbook or elementary sense of self-respect. I carefully fueled my rage. I hated the lie itself, the absurdity of the situation, and the fact that I now had to mentally saw the relationship I'd considered a single whole into 3 separate human disasters with names and surnames. I hated that I could no longer look at old messages without wondering who exactly was pressing the buttons at that moment. But most of all, I hated that they'd made me feel like a fool in the most intimate way. Humiliation mixed with feelings always has a very long shelf life. And then the worst thing happened. I realized that I knew them. Despite the deception, despite Nora being a myth, the components of that myth were painfully familiar to me. Once I stopped resisting, the lie didn't disappear. It just acquired faces and specific handwriting. I started rereading the message archive, as if studying ruins after a fire. And each time, One of them crystallized out of the general flow. Allison was the one who sent reasoned, measured paragraphs at 1 a.m, when my life turned into gray fog, and I needed not jokes, but solid ground. It was she who once wrote, "You always treat fatigue as a moral failure, not a bodily problem. Slow down." At the time, I paused over that message, thinking I was talking to an oracle whose boundaries were better built than mine. At the station, listening to her voice and watching her take the blow, I was finally convinced. It was her. No one else could have turned care into such a sharp, almost surgical construct. Samantha was much worse, because she was tenderness. Those very soft details around which I'd built my strongest attachment, those voice messages that sounded like light in a dark room, belonged to her. She was the one who remembered whether I'd eaten. It was she who said, "You don't have to win every shitty day. Just don't make it your religion." That phrase helped me survive a terrible week in February. Now that phrase belonged to a real girl, with guilty eyes and hands that couldn't find peace from shame. And it was damn uncomfortable to keep being angry at someone who'd patched your holes. And Catherine? Catherine was obvious. All that chaos, all that provocative filth, and those phrases after which I paced the room, not knowing where to put the adrenaline. It was she who wrote, "If I were in your room right now, I'd definitely ruin your life on purpose." And 10 minutes later, sleep. You get too needy when you're tired, and that's dangerous for me. I'd thought Nora had a wide range of moods. No, Nora just had Catherine. On the second night, Daler came over. He found me on the couch, staring at my phone as if it had just committed high treason. "You look like a Victorian drama hero who's just been disinherited," he observed. "That's because I've been emotionally robbed by an entire creative collective." Okay, let's go over this again. What are you feeling now? I hate them, but at the same time, I know exactly which one of them was which part of my happiness, and that's killing me. Daler looked at me with the sympathy usually reserved for the terminally ill. Oh, dude, you're in deep. If you've already started telling them apart, you're still in the system. If they'd remained abstract lies to you, you'd just delete the account and move on. But now Nora has split, and every detail still feels real to you. He was right. The chaos hadn't simplified my emotional picture. It had multiplied it. I hadn't loved one fake girl. I'd loved 3 real personalities distributed across one profile in the stupidest way possible. The first message came from Samantha. Not from the shared account, from her personal number. Apparently, Allison had sent me their contacts to establish normal boundaries, which was very much her style. Samantha, I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I just wanted to say, the part of her that cared whether you slept, it was real. I'm sorry it was me, not who you thought it was. It was a punch to the gut, because that was exactly my grief. The care was real, but the name on the envelope was fake. I stared at the screen for a long time and, against all common sense, replied, "Me. That doesn't make the situation any easier." She answered a minute later, "I know. I just didn't want you to think it was all an act." Later that evening, Catherine texted, "No greetings, no reflection." Catherine, by the way, I know you hate me the most. Statistically, that's fair. I smirked involuntarily. 1-0 to her perceptiveness. Me, well, at least you admit it yourself. Catherine, yes, the worst creative decision of my life. But what's even worse is that I miss our arguments, and that's humiliating for both of us. That message stuck in my head, not because it was pleasant, but because it was honest. Allison texted only the next morning, as always, measured and to the point. Allison, you don't have to reply to us, but if silence toward specific people is easier for you than silence toward a ghost, I'll understand. I nearly threw my phone at the wall. She knew me too well. Even in pieces, they knew how I thought. I hated them, but at the same time, I knew exactly who had been with me on any given night. I heard their voices inside that archive I'd once called Nora. I felt my once whole attachment slowly splitting and settling around 3 real girls. The lie didn't become smaller because I learned the truth, but the loss became stranger. I wasn't mourning a fake girlfriend. I was mourning a group project that, against all logic and morality, had become emotionally real to me in every single piece. And that was the most disgusting admission I'd ever had to make to myself. The first full confrontation after the unmasking took place in a cafe that certainly didn't deserve to become the arena for such emotional battles. I agreed to it only because closing this matter alone proved impossible. Too many threads from each of them led to my mind. Closing a relationship with a committee is a complex bureaucratic process. We had too many unfinished dialogues and shared memories distributed among them in the most ridiculous way. Allison arrived first. 3 minutes early, with a perfectly straight back and the look of someone ready to declare even their own sins. Samantha appeared next, looking as if she'd apologized to every lamppost on the way. Catherine burst in last. She collapsed into her chair as if punctuality were an invention for the weak. The first 10 minutes passed in deadly politeness. That was the most alarming symptom. People who have done something monstrous always start with exaggerated courtesy. It's like trying to hold a cracked plate together. Everyone pretends it's whole, even though the edges are already cutting their fingers. I asked technical questions. I needed to understand the mechanics of the deception. Who answered most often? How did they decide who would be Nora today? At what point did they realize I'd completely swallowed the bait? Allison answered with frightening precision. Samantha supplemented her when it came to feelings. Catherine sniped from the flank, masking guilt with sarcasm that was clearly burning her heels. But then I asked the question that blew all the fuses. Did any of you seriously think I was falling in love with you specifically? Silence. Samantha lowered her eyes. Allison exhaled slowly. And Catherine suddenly laughed shortly. That sharp laugh I'd heard in her messages. Yes, she snapped. We all thought that at different times. That was the whole problem. I blinked, trying to grasp the scale of the disaster. The story had finally turned from fraud into something far more shameful. A competition. It turned out that Nora had become so unstable in recent weeks, not because her mood was changing, but because a quiet war was raging inside the committee over territory. Each of them had secretly begun to believe, or hope, that the part of Nora I liked most was created by her. You responded to each of us differently, Samantha whispered, finally looking up. And we saw it. We saw which phrases you reacted to faster, which jokes made you laugh longer. It was unbearable. It turned out that I hadn't just been texting a perfect girl. I'd been leaving a digital trail of my preferences, which 3 idiots attached to each other, and to me, were studying under a microscope to adapt or outdo each other. So you were competing? My voice came out drier than I'd intended. That sounds uglier than it actually felt, Catherine observed, twirling an empty cup. It sounds exactly like it is. Allison tried to take control of the situation. Good old Nora the analyst. It wasn't a conscious plan, she said. None of us sat down to decide how to win you for good. We just started feeling it, separately. But Catherine wouldn't let her finish. She was clearly tired of playing civilized divorce. Oh, come on, Lur. Samantha was sure that what mattered most to you was her softness. You thought that without your control, everything would fall apart. And I knew that you truly spark only when I push you to the breaking point. I sat between them and understood. They'd privatized different parts of my heart. Samantha was sure she was the foundation. Catherine, that she was the spark. Allison, that she was the framework holding it all together. And the scariest part was that all three were right. That evening, the committee finally disintegrated before my eyes. They were no longer a united front. They were three women arguing over the authorship of a relationship that should never have existed. You always wrote longer when the conversation got serious. Samantha looked at Allison almost defiantly. That was my part. That doesn't matter, Allison snapped. It does, Catherine slapped the table. Because he got hooked on our shared drive, and the drive came from me. I watched this theater of the absurd and felt something inside me finally snap. I wasn't a person to them. I was a shared achievement they could no longer divide. But at the same time, I could see how much it hurt them. Really hurt. They were no longer sharing an account. They were sharing the right to what had been between us. And I, the victim of this collective mind, suddenly realized I couldn't just walk away, because some part of me was still attached to each of them. We parted that evening, having resolved nothing, but one thing became clear. Nora was gone. There were three girls who had played God too well, and now stood among the ruins of their own creation, waiting for me to choose which of the fragments I valued most. The phrase that finally knocked the ground out from under my feet belonged to Allison. Of course it did. Catherine could wound in one line. Samantha made guilt feel like bad weather. But Allison knew how to deliver the truth so gently and precisely that you had to carry it in your hands all the way home. We left the cafe after the argument became too noticeable to bystanders. Staying there would have meant dragging random witnesses into our disputes, which no one wanted. We walked to the river. Walking gives feelings too much space. We ended up in the park, on the embankment, where the evening light turned any bad decision into a beautiful shot. For a while, we were silent. Catherine kicked gravel viciously. Samantha looked like she was ready to jump into the water if it would simplify the conversation, and Allison led us forward with the sheer force of her perfect posture. Finally, I said what had been circling in my head for days. I don't know what to do with all of this. We're not comfortable either, Catherine muttered. We stopped at the railing. The water below was suspiciously calm for the chaos in our souls. And then Allison said, "You've never been dating one girl. I mean, emotionally." It wasn't a shock like at the station. It was recognition. I looked at her, and she continued in that same tone with which Nora the analyst used to diagnose me at 3 a.m. You didn't love a fake. You loved a system assembled from 3 real people. Comfort was Samantha. Danger, Catherine. Stability, me. And what you called Nora wasn't an empty lie. It was an arrangement of things that really exist, just in different bodies. It was the ugliest and simultaneously the most accurate description of the disaster. I gripped the railing, because damn it, she was right. I hadn't loved a fiction. I'd loved a cocktail of 3 living hearts. That doesn't help, I managed, not looking at them. I know, Allison replied without a hint of excuse. She wasn't trying to defend herself, and that was the most infuriating thing. If she'd started hedging, I could have stayed in the comfortable zone of righteous anger. But she insisted on the most inconvenient truth. Our feelings had been real, even if the form had been criminal. Catherine leaned against the railing next to me. Want to know the worst part? Absolutely not. Too bad. We all thought about who you'd choose, if the truth came out. I froze. Choose? I repeated. Samantha spoke up, her voice so quiet it was almost drowned out by the lapping water. We thought which of us you'd want to keep when Nora fell apart. There it was. The most pitiful and honest confession in this whole story. They weren't just afraid of exposure. They were afraid of losing to each other in a contest for my attention. I smirked involuntarily, tired and bitter. That's just disgusting. But honest. Catherine looked at me point blank without blinking. I understood. I'd never been dating one girl. I'd been dating softness, sarcasm, and precision on a schedule. I'd loved a system I'd mistaken for chemistry, because chemistry was the only language I knew for that degree of closeness. And now before me stood an unbearable question. If the person I'd loved was made up of all three, what was I supposed to do with these shards now that they stood before me separately, demanding recognition? Allison broke the silence again. You don't have to choose right now, and you shouldn't punish yourself by turning this tragedy into a tender. It was a phrase that Nora had said to me in the night when I was too broken to respect myself. It was her phrase, Allison's. How could I not have recognized it before? You know what's the worst part? I finally looked at all of them. That I can see them now. Your parts. I know where Samantha held my hand, where Catherine lit the fire, and where Allison saved me. I hate that I can tell you apart. And I hate that I still need every single one of those parts. No one answered. Because it was a dead end. If Nora had dissolved into the fog of lies, I could have buried her. But she hadn't disappeared. She'd just split apart. I'd never been dating one girl. And once I accepted that, the question, was it real, became truly dangerous. Because reality distributed among three people isn't something you can just brush off. It's a mythological punishment for a guy who was too sure of his ability to understand women. That night, I didn't make a choice. Nor the next night, nor even a week later. It was perhaps the first truly adult decision in this whole absurd story. When your heart is first turned into a group project and then dismantled for parts, you shouldn't try to glue it back together in one evening. No dramatic reality show finales where I point triumphantly at one of them and say, "It was always you." Life isn't that narratively tidy when three idiots with phones and one guy with an excess of trust are involved. I took a break. Real distance. No let's stay friends, which really means continuing to text at 2 a.m. Just silence. Allison accepted it with the understanding of a strategist. Samantha looked as if she prepared herself for execution in advance. And Catherine just grunted. Fair, but I still hate it. That was all of her, loyal to her instincts to the very end. The following weeks were shitty, and they were shitty in a new way. Nora's absence fell on me in shifts. When night came, I missed Samantha. Her gentle check-ins, how she sensed my fatigue from an extra comma in a message, and forbade me from romanticizing my sleep deprivation. When anger or excitement boiled up in me, when I wanted to say something cutting, I missed Catherine. Her speed, her shamelessness, her phrases that made me laugh and rage at the same time. And in the long gray hours, when the world seemed too complex for one person, I missed Allison. Her stability and clarity. Someone who could talk to the part of me that always tries to structure everything, and forgave me that boring habit. That was my personal paradox. I couldn't miss Nora as a whole. I missed fragments. And every fragment now had a face, a name, and a phone number. Allison texted first, from her personal number. I'll understand if you don't want to reply, but if you need the whole truth, without edits or revisions, I'll tell it. Sometimes context matters, so you stop imagining things worse than reality. It was so in her style that I smiled involuntarily. We met. Then I met with Samantha. And finally, after long internal debate, with Catherine. Separately. No committee, no collective guilt, just them, as they were. And that's when it hit me. They weren't just playing roles. Samantha really didn't sleep until 4 a.m. when I was feeling bad, not as manipulation, but because she was genuinely shaking with worry. Catherine really missed me to the bone, It was her form of attachment, wild and honest. And Allison? Allison had realized things were falling apart earlier than anyone, but stayed because I'd stopped being the guy from the comments to her long before the game spiraled out of control. What they'd done was terrible, selfish, and deserved its own chapter in an ethics textbook. But the feelings beneath that layer of lies had been real. The girl I'd loved existed. She was just distributed across 3 hearts. She wasn't a fake or an empty shell. She was real in the worst sense of the word, assembled from pieces of truth that each of them had put into that shared account. And when it came time to decide, the question wasn't, which of them is Nora? That question had no answer. The question was different. With which of these real people, now without masks, could I build something honest? I chose Allison, not because she was the safest, but because she was the only one with whom I could imagine surviving after such a truth. Samantha had too much tenderness mixed with guilt. Every conversation with her turned into walking on broken glass. Catherine was magnetic, but we were too explosive. Our chemistry was built on destruction, and I wanted something that wouldn't burn down at the first gust of wind. Allison knew how to admit, this started wrong. She didn't look away. She understood that we'd have to build from the very foundation, without myths and borrowed tones. Our first real date, without shadows of the past, happened in a quiet bar by the river. Allison looked at me over the rim of her glass with that same attention that had once belonged to Nora, but now was solely her own. "I'll understand if you can never separate me from all of this," she said. It was a risk we both understood. "I don't think I can," I answered honestly. She froze. "You're part of this story. You're not separate from it, but you're real in it, and that's enough for me to want to know you without all the other additions." I saw her shoulders finally relax. It wasn't a stormy display of emotion. Allison wasn't built for that. But it was the relief of someone who'd finally been given permission to be herself. "That's the first sane thought in this whole situation," she smiled. The bar was low. Still. My online girlfriend turned out to be a startup run by 3 women. It was humiliating, absurd, and absolutely idiotic. But love, as it turned out, can survive even the stupidest structure if enough truth was hidden inside it. It just doesn't come out of such a shakeup unchanged. I no longer search for Nora. I search for Allison. With her tough character, her analytical mind, and her own care, distributed to no one else. We learned again, without group chats and shift work. Because in the end, what matters isn't how you met, but whether you're ready to look at each other when all masks are off and all that's left on the table are naked facts and 2 people who decided to try again.
3 hearts in one account. 3 hearts, 1 ghost. Met her in the comments, she was sharper than the rest. Said I sounded like the roommate who'd never washed a mess. And we moved to private messages before the night was done. Like an interrupted conversation finally begun. 4 months of perfect timing, every nerve she knew to press. Soft when I was breaking, sharp when I was full of stress. And I told my friend she's multifaceted, she has range. And he said, dude, no girl is naturally this strange. She drank black coffee, then she sent a frappuccino shot. Said I love this garbage, and I let it tie the knot. And I knew, oh deep down I knew right then something didn't add up. But I went numb again. 3 hearts in one account. Oh, 3 hearts in one ghost. 1 soft, 1 sharp, 1 steady. Oh, the trinity I loved most. 3 hearts in one account. Oh, and I never saw the seams, cause she answered every question. Oh, she lived inside my dreams. At the station there were 3 of them, oh, walking up to me, each one looking like they'd seen me at 3 a.m. Undeniably, 3 hearts in one account. Oh, and the worst part of the lie was the care was real. Oh, but the name on it was a lie. 3 hearts in one account. She typed, "We're here," and I looked up and the world just split apart. 3 strangers walking through me with the keys to my own heart. Alice in the framework, Samantha the warm light, Catherine the danger, oh the spark that kept me up at night. They said we took shifts when you got sick, we couldn't let you fall. Said the joke stopped being funny months ago, that's all. And I sat there in the station cafe in a stupid blue shirt, learning my whole love story was a group project to hurt. And they all thought at different times that I've been falling for them. And the worst part wasn't lying, it was competing for me, friend. Cause I knew right then that I left a digital trail and they'd studied it again. 3 hearts in one account. Oh, 3 hearts in one ghost. One soft, one sharp, one steady. Oh, the trinity I love most. 3 hearts in one account. Oh, and I never saw the seams, cause she answered every question. Oh, she lived inside my dreams. At the station there were 3 of them, oh, walking up to me, each one looking like they'd seen me at 3 a.m. Undeniably, 3 hearts in one account. Oh, and the worst part of the lie was the care was real. Oh, but the name on it was a lie. On the river, Allison said, "You never dated one. You dated softness, danger, stability, oh, all in one. What you called Nora wasn't empty, it was real, just spread across 3 different bodies, oh, 3 different heads. And I missed them all in shifts, so that was the cool design. Samantha at midnight, Catherine when I needed wine, Allison in the gray hours when the world got too dense to hold, and I couldn't bury one ghost, cause she split into 3 folds. So I took distance, took silence, took the slowest road back. And when I finally chose, oh, it wasn't to fill a lack. It was Allison, not safest, but the only one who'd say, "This started wrong, let's build from the ground the honest way." 3 hearts in one account, oh, and I survived the fall. One soft, one sharp, one steady, oh, but I couldn't keep them all. 3 hearts in one account, oh, and I learned the hardest part. You can love a system, oh, mistake it for a heart. At the station there were 3 of them, oh, and the myth went down. But the truth, oh, the truth was wearing one real crown. 3 hearts in one account, oh, and now there's only one. And we're learning, oh, we're learning, with the masks off and undone. 3 hearts in one account, oh. You're part of the story. You're not separate from it, but you're real in it. That's enough. The bar was low. Still, 3 hearts, 1 ghost. 3 hearts, 1 ghost. Now just 1, oh, just 1. 3 hearts in one account. 3 hearts in one account.